Welcome to the Farm to Food podcast. I'm Hugh Maynard, publisher of the Gleaner newspaper, the team that brings you this podcast every 2 weeks. The theme of this episode is Farmers Matter, Food Matters, an overview of the first season of the Farm to Food podcast to wrap up in anticipation of the summer break, well deserved, and set the stage for the second season. So joining me today is the crew at the Gleaner, Jackie Rourke, executive editor, Sarah Rennie, who is the news editor, and Callan Forrester will join us shortly as she's the reporter at the Gleaner, and of course Farmer Phil from Quinn Farm in Île-Perrot. Welcome everybody.
Hello.
First off, Farmer Phil, how's the cropping season going so far?
It started out pretty good. We were able to get into the field fairly early. It was cool and things kind of took their time coming out, which is all right. Much, much better than a precocious spring where risk of frost during bloom is always an issue. A little bit later is fine at that time of year, but then the last 2 weeks or so, it's just been a deluge. Rain, just nonstop rain. We are way too wet as it is, and we are so thankful to be drier than most. Good friends just south of Montreal. It's devastating, complete crop losses. We're behind, and it's not good, but it's not that bad for us.
Strawberries are out.
Strawberries are out. We are having to work really, really hard to get the grey mold under control with all this wet.
All right, so farmers are changing. It's been a big, repetitive conversation through the first season, and along the lines of farming as it changes are still misunderstood. You see the milk cartons and the farmer in overalls holding hands with a little girl in a bucket and a pail walking through a bucolic countryside, and the marketing images that we have to deal with. Our biggest episode, was mental health, in terms of listenership, which is, I think, a real reflection of the importance of that topic. And as well, la relève, the succession, young farmers coming into the business. So, round table, a few thoughts on those topics and how the world is changing for farmers.
Oh goodness, the world is changing. I'm getting too old for this stuff. But that's the one constant in life is change, and I'm pretty sure those who embrace it will be farther ahead. I'm very thrilled to see both our boys embracing the past and all of the important topics that are not topics, but the importance of the past, and embracing all of the changes coming up, being more progressive than we were, looking for more natural alternatives than we were. I'm really, really stoked to see them attack the future.
Take on the world.
Yeah.
As someone who's not from a farming background, what has struck me over the course of these podcast episodes was really getting a sense of all the variables that farmers have to deal with. I mean, we kind of know that. We know that the weather is unpredictable, but when you get drilled down into the nitty gritty of how does that translate into what happens day to day, I just episode 1 with Jess Elwell and going through like her routine and how when there's too much rain, what has to happen when there's not enough rain. Last summer there was August had no rain, and how they had to just change all their schedules to start hand watering everything. As someone who didn't grow up in that environment, it was a bit of an eye-opener to see how your entire life is dictated by those variables. So I thought Jess gave us a really good overview of that.
One of the big consequences of it being droughty is that it takes a person out of the field who could be weeding or planting or even doing office work, and they are running around almost full time, like setting up irrigation line, fixing irrigation lines, fixing sprinklers, because we can only irrigate so much at one time because we only have so much pressure in our tank for the well. We also have a bunch of greenhouses on the farm, and in a greenhouse you can't water for 3 hours at a time. You have to water just a little bit at a time. And so it's a lot of work to the pump to be constantly watering the greenhouses and then watering the field. And then also like a lot of things, it's not good to water at night because they get sick if the leaves can't dry out, and you can't water everything overnight either. It's a big puzzle. And it's been hot as F. And so it's not just a drought. It's like a drought with like heat wave after heat wave after heat wave. If it was like 15, even 20 degrees and dry is different than it being 40 degrees and dry as well.
Yeah. I think maybe one of the most important things to remember is that behind mental health and behind la relève and the young people who are coming into farming and everything, probably the biggest thing that we can't control at this point is the climate and the weather. And climate change is, I think, going to be the biggest story coming. It's already one of the biggest stories. We saw it just this past weekend, torrential rains that are coming out of nowhere that we're not prepared for and we're not anticipating, because normally that comes later in the season. It doesn't come in June, and so we're I think having to adapt and having to change is something that's been part of farming forever, but I think maybe the swings are a little bit wilder right now, in the way that people are having to adapt and change. And I think it is showing with our younger farmers who are finding, really innovative and different ways to sort of look at farming and make sure that they're actually getting what they want out of it while doing the actual hard, very hard and long committed work.
The weather is whatever. It's we're putting fires out constantly, it seems to me, but add the legislation to that and it just weighs on you so heavily. I really look forward to talking to officials in the government and giving them a little piece of my mind and just letting them know how much it weighs on us and how hard it is.
You're talking about the administrative stuff?
That, all kinds of new legislation coming in for animal welfare, for production records, sporadic inspections in the middle of a busy season, coming from our town, our province, and the feds as well. CFIA will sporadically come in. Our insurance will come in and just have an inspection and give us a long list of things to do in the middle of a planting season. Please come see us in February or January. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, a good example is last week at the Quinn Farm kiosk at the St. Anne de Bellevue Farmers Market. The Montreal City inspectors came by. Well, guess what? Their standards are different from MAPAC, which is the provincial one, which applies to the farmers market in Île-Perrot. So 2 different sets of standards for 2 different farmers markets, not 10 kilometers apart. So, that's just one of 14 million different rules and regulations that come in, and I'm sure everybody knows from their work situation, but with farming, particularly the intensity of the work that takes place in the summertime, having to deal with these kinds of things is quite different. So there's an election coming up, and we're going to talk about that when we come back in September, big time, and of course all kinds of promises will be made. This is your chance, Phil and Sarah, as a farmer. What do you want from the government?
I want less of them around. That's what I want.
In 30 seconds or less of them.
Boots on the ground on their part. If they could come out and see us and talk to us, that would be great. And less of the bureaucracy. It is just a huge white elephant in Ottawa that is so inefficient and doesn't really care about us on the ground.
Yeah, just that big disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what's happening in office towers. I think it becomes really obvious when it comes to, just the demands that are being made on farmers all the time.
And on top of that, could you answer this survey so we know what's going on the ground, right?
Repetitive surveys from le Ministère de l'Agriculture du Québec, le MAPAC, asking the exact same questions as Statistics Canada, and having the balls to ask you at the end of it all, do you mind if we share this with other government entities? By all means, please do, and leave us alone. Send us one survey in February or January. That'd be awesome. But come June, if my wife has to answer ridiculous questions when we're in the thick of it. It weighs on your mental health. It does.
Well, and that brings us back to, as Hugh referenced, the episode that actually got the most views and listens was the mental health episode, which I think was really important to understand. Some of the statistics that jumped out of me, it's a difficult topic, but it clearly is essential to talk about. The suicide rate being almost 3 times that of just the generalized population. And one thing that really struck me in this last year, Sarah, was what you said when the reason why you decided to take that Sentinel training, because you recognize that you're out there meeting the farmers all the time. So I think that episode was really important because I think we highlighted a lot of services that do exist, for farmers, and that there are people looking out, for their well-being. So I thought that was a really important episode.
Very much so. Our team at Quinn Farm also took the Sentinel course after losing my best friend Eric about 11 years ago. And being able to recognize the signs in myself as well is super important. Oh wow, I'm not doing good. I gotta talk about this, or take a day off, maybe have a nap, just take a step backwards. If things don't get done today, that's okay. But living with the weight of the legacy of generations gone by is tremendous as well.
And I think it was super helpful, Phil, that you addressed that head on in the podcast. It's helpful for others who are hesitant to do so,
We all feel it. We all have bad days, and sometimes it gets really heavy.
And we're not talking about thunderstorms.
No, that's just a drop in the bucket.
Talking about thunderstorms, world politics, which all the way from the war in the Middle East, which we talked about, climate change, a lot of things that are macro in the sense that on a daily basis, neither of you or any farmer can really control, but can only react to and deal with. So how is the situation? Gas prices went up, gas prices went down. Did the fertilizer come in? All those kinds of things that we talked about. How did that transpire over the last 6 months?
If you're looking at the info coming out of USDA and here in Canada as well, record gross profits will be had this year. For the first time ever, negative net profits are forecast. That is very
volume up.
Yeah,
margins down.
Bingo. Yeah. That will mean a lot of bankruptcies. It will mean perhaps some government bailouts south of the border. It'll mean a lot of sad farmers too.
Yeah, in fact, in episode 12, we decided at that point, when there was so much going on, how do we talk about what farmers are dealing with right now? Suddenly, gas prices were shooting up. There was questions of fertilizer prices are going to go up. So episode 12, we called it Global Disruption and Local Impact. Sarah, you spoke with an interview I found really interesting, was with the UPA Montérégie, so our region's president for the Union des Producteurs Agricoles, Jérémie Letellier. And I found that was really interesting to hear about the mounting pressures that are on farmers. It was great to get that kind of access to someone who can take the views of local farmers and talk to the government about just what you guys were talking about before, all this administration. So, Sarah, that you had that access with Jérémie was really good.
Mm-hmm. Jérémie's actually, he's fantastic. He comes to local events all the time as far as, union reps are concerned and heads. He's quite motivated, and he certainly knows this area very, very well.
Last year was the first year that the actual net revenue for farmers as a whole in Quebec was negative. There were some lean years in the back, but to be below zero for the first time, that's a really alarming signal. And it's not one that I'm sure our political elected people are aware of or understand the importance of it, or they're so drowned with other priorities within our society. Our president, McAuslan, always says that, less than 1% of the budget, provincial or federal, is going back to agriculture and the agro industry, and it doesn't really make sense. Other countries within the Western Hemisphere are much closer to 2%. So we're pretty much underfunded. We're cutting on research right now. It's I understand that there has to be some priority established by the government is cutting in research in agriculture that eventually should secure our food safety. Is that a good way to go? And not many people ask that question right now.
But yeah, he had a lot to say, especially when it came to, some of the other ways that people maybe aren't aware. We talked about fertilizer prices, those sorts of things, but there's also, carbon issues, carbon taxes that farmers were having to face, and that's been a long-standing fight that nobody else, the Americans aren't having to do that. Actually, no other province imposes this kind of payment on its farmers, and our farmers are having to pay a certain amount for the carbon that they're using, because it's being passed on to them from the carbon.
And on the other hand,
their gas and oil from, right?
And on the other hand, a lot of countries in Europe are getting carbon credits. Farmers are getting carbon credits for steps that they're taking to alleviate the use of carbon.
Yeah.
Whereas it's just not happening here.
No, it's one of those weird things. Like we always sort of say, and Jess, again, to bring Jess Elwell up, but she says it all the time, but we sort of taken it on too. As far as organic farming is concerned, like we have to pay to be certified organic. It doesn't make any sense. We should be earning credits, those sorts of things, for doing things that are actually positive for the environment and those sorts of things. But going back to this subject, it's pretty clear. Our government actually listened as far as the carbon tax argument was concerned, and it we got a new premier, and one of the first things that she actually did was to say that she was going to give people a break on that, at least. I don't think it's a permanent thing that she's put in place yet, but it's certainly something that she's working on. So sometimes the government listens.
Yeah, that was great to see that show up in our newspaper just a few weeks later. It's like, wow. Not that we necessarily had anything to do with it, but you're right. It seemed like the government was listening on that point.
Well, there's an election coming, so keep the suggestions flowing, and maybe you'll get some response on some of those things. We also, in a number of episodes, delved into the consumer end of food production. We looked at making beer. We looked at bees and honey. We looked at restaurants in some of the episodes. What do you see on that scale coming up?
People are just looking for that connection to the farmer. They're craving it because in their daily lives they don't have real connections. And what more romantic way to have a connection, and well, there are other ways, but to enjoy your food. It is something, to me, there is a connection there. There's something sensual about it whenever you enjoy proper food and you know where it comes from. People just thrive on that and they want it.
Yeah, I remember the conversation with Peter McAuslan at Saint-Amboise Brewery in the microbrewery session. I'm a microbrewery aficionado, I like a really good beer.
And so, in fact, our business plan was that we would have only, I think our initial target was 100 to 400 beers sold on the island of Montreal was our kind of business plan. So a very, very small market share. Ultimately, we ended up with roughly a 2% share of all Quebec beer. So we went way, way beyond that. And then it was largely because we decided to make something very different from the mainstream brewers. So we were clearly differentiated. Most beer consumers didn't like what we made, which was fine. But we had enough people who really were interested in what we did that we could grow a market with that. Guys like you, guys like me, a whole bunch, and women as well. In fact, the female part of the market became very, very important to us. So it was, it was sort of a dynamic that actually worked, and we sort of bet on that, and it seemed to have worked.
interviewing him was not work, it was fun. You know, it was the joy of something I enjoy in terms of food and culture and things like that. So people do really connect with that part of the agri-food equation.
And to pick up on what Hugh was saying, Lesley Chesterman, who's a well-known restaurant and food critic in Montreal, I was struck when she said that whereas 20 years ago, a restaurant linking itself to a farm or a few farms was kind of rare, certainly in this part of the world. Now it's almost becoming the norm, as she put it, around the world. More and more restaurants are doing that.
For me, using farm ingredients is not at all a trend. It is now the norm. And this is not just here in Quebec. It is the world over. This is the way high-end cooking works now. I'm going to go next month. I'm going to London to see this excellent chef, and I'm going to spend the night at his restaurant's farm to see what they do. And this was very rare. I mean, there was a chef called Alain Passard in Paris who had a farm. That's the first one I can think of. It's now become the norm, and it is kind of very prestigious to say that you have a farm attached to your restaurant.
So it kind of ties in with what you were saying, Phil, about people wanting to know where their food comes from. And I think people appreciate knowing more and more that their food is coming from a local, provider.
Yeah, for us at our stall, it's carrots.
Yes.
We're one of the only farms I know of that actually plants carrots in a greenhouse so that we can have them for like the very first start of the season, our first vegetable baskets. We try to have carrots. And it's the first thing people go to because it's a big pop of color on the table, but it's also, everybody knows how much better a carrot is when it's just pulled out of the garden. There's nothing that compares to that. It's candy, basically. And, and we see that, and we're seeing it this year with the farmers market too. There is a drive, I think, for people to come back to the farms and coming back to sort of just food, going and getting food at its very base. And then getting to sort of play and manipulate with it at home. I think people are really enjoying and getting into that a lot more. It's not quite like it was, during the pandemic where we had, this rush on food and people were suddenly panicking that they weren't going to have access to it. But the markets are very popular right now. We're finding people are coming. We're seeing that sort of, I don't know if you're seeing that, Phil, with your markets, but at our markets, they're quite popular and people are very, very happy to be finding food and buying quite a bit of it.
Yep. We're finding with the economy being a little bit tough right now, people will splurge on good food and experiences there, whereas they won't have the money to go on a summer vacation this summer, so they'll come to the farm and enjoy the place. Anytime there's a economic downturn, we don't feel it very much at Quinn's Farm because those who can afford to travel will come to Quinn's Farm. So we're quite lucky that way. Very, very lucky. That's what I'd love to drive home to other farmers that are growing it and producing it in a traditional way and wholesaling their product. They are being dictated what they're going to get for their product. And retail is king. Oh my goodness. You get to have those relationships, set your prices, and make it a proper living, an honest living, as honest as any plumber or electrician or lawyer. It's important for a farmer to have an honest living, to get an honest wage for the amount of work, the crazy amount of work that goes into producing food.
And the farmers markets they're a litmus test, right? Because you're on the front lines, you're talking with the consumers.
And we certainly focused on all of that in episode 16, all on agritourism. And I really liked, Phil, how you said in your intro to that one, you were encouraging, which you just did now again, farmers to consider not just, shipping it off to their middlemen, but actually to be retailers and doing something on the farm. But I imagine not every farmer can do that, but I thought it was really interesting that you were encouraging others to consider that because you had this gentleman visit you at one American farm. I think both Hugh and I picked that intro as one of our favorite moments of the last year. That story, if you want to just recount it a little bit and tell us about that.
It was an American from the deep south coming up, spending a little bit of time with his family that had moved up here to Montreal. His daughter married a French Canadian and we're working up here in Montreal. So he spent 2-3 weeks with them in the summer of, I don't know, 2021, somewhere in there. And they just come out for a beautiful day's fun at the farm, and he was reminiscing at the missed opportunity that he could have had on his family farm. They had to dismantle the farm and sell it. They had an auction. And he was just sad that he hadn't seen the possibilities that he saw at our place that day, that summer with his family, and been able to keep the family farm going. That's one of our missions, is to help the entire industry, to elevate the industry, the image, and to better the livelihoods of farmers is one of our missions at the farm. And what better way to do that than to retail your product, have an on-farm boutique, have guests come to the farm. And I realize some people are remote and it's not possible. That's not true. You can do it in Newfoundland, on the very northern point of Newfoundland, you can do it. And some folks just can't stand the retail aspect of it. Having guests on the farm can be stressful. But if you look at the bank account at the end of the day, you might be able to get over that. And just making, like I said earlier, an honest living for the amount of work that goes into the food you produce.
It must help to know that, your farm was able to make that conversion and have a really sustainable future. So
last Sunday we had hail in. One of those big storms cells came in, and we had hail for about 2.5 minutes. We lost about 25% of our crops total there, from apples to blueberries to strawberries to pumpkins that were flattened. And I was not too happy about it. But then yesterday, Monday, the following day, we had guests in droves, and they were picking strawberries that were covered in sand from the splashback on the wet weather we had. And they were just so happy about being on the farm and having a great day. And it's a morale boost for me to have guests on the farm and just being so happy about the experience.
So let's jump into what's next, looking down the road. So we've got some ideas that we want to talk about in the fall. One of them, I know it's very close to you, Phil, is temporary farm workers. The agricultural industry in this country, by and large, relies on Guatemalans, Jamaicans, Mexicans that come in large numbers, tens of thousands now. And if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have a lot of fresh produce on our tables. So that's going to be a very important conversation that we're going to have come September.
Very much looking forward to that one. And if we could have a translator there, I would love to have featured one or two of our guys and have them tell you all about it.
That'd be very cool.
Yeah, we could employ AI, which is another topic we're going to jump into, because nobody is exempt from the impact of AI, regardless of the job that you do, and particularly in terms of some of the record keeping, the monitoring of yields, of temperatures in buildings, and all kinds of different things. AI is going to have a significant impact both on the effectiveness and the efficiency of agricultural production in the future.
Might get a younger farmer to talk about that one.
Okay.
My wife, your daughter, Hugh, uses AI for her marketing now. Composing texts and coming up with images, and it is quite remarkable. It will just she typed in a few words there to find out what kind of target audience we have here at the farm, just what is our demographic, and she had amazing results. And I don't want to spoil it. I'm going to let her talk to you about it. Featuring her for AI would be a very smart move. But it was remarkable what AI threw at us whenever she asked those little questions.
And then Sarah's been telling us that farmers are using AI it's drones to seed fields. I'd love to see that. And other uses of AI that are kind of totally unexpected to me anyway.
Funny you should say that. Our field manager at the farm and I were touring the farm after the disaster of the storm. And we figured the only way we can get in and treat our crops is with a drone, or the next seeding of crop could be done with a drone, because there's no way for a tractor to get into that field for the next week or so.
And then there's going to be politics, which will not to do with the Middle East or anything like that. But as I mentioned, Denmark is going to scrap the Ministry of Agriculture. Taras Vaudreuil, which is right next to you, Phil, has now declared trees a sentient being. So
with rights?
First municipality in Canada to do so. But as you know, when these things happen, it starts to happen somewhere else. And so trees are both beneficial, shade, windbreaks, other kinds of things, but they also have roots that dig into tile drainage and buildings and branches that, continuously grow and stuff like that. So going to have implications, and those are just a couple of things that are coming down the pipeline. And if trees are sentient beings, then what other crops are going to be sentient beings? And I'm not talking against it necessarily, but it's how it gets applied in the regulatory framework, as they use the term, and how does that impact, particularly small farms that don't always have the depth of resources to deal with these kinds of things.
Sarah, what have you found in terms of the farmers you've spoken to over this series of podcasts, in terms of how do they feel about just being asked these questions about us, showing interest in their challenges? I would guess that farmers might often feel kind of like not fully understood and not fully appreciated.
To a certain extent, I think a lot of people enjoy the opportunity to just sort of talk about what they do, and because they're so passionate. I don't know any farmer that if you get them talking about what they actually do on the farm that won't talk and talk and talk. They're given the opportunity, they're so proud. It is an incredible lifestyle. It's an incredible job. It's incredible work, and so they're not at all upset about being asked to talk about what they're doing. There are obviously some subjects that people are a little bit more reluctant to talk about. There's some subjects that are still within agriculture that are quite taboo. I mean, we booked some of those with the mental health episode, but it's still very taboo. There are other sorts of, issues within agriculture that some farmers maybe don't want to talk about. There's always little teeny conflicts, those sorts of things about what we're doing with our land, about the environment. And some farmers are very happy to speak about things, and some are a little bit less happy. And so some subjects have been off the books with some farmers, and we've had a couple of people that have said they'd prefer not to speak on. It's been interesting. They've been okay doing an article for the newspaper, but not a podcast. So that's been interesting too, in the sense that some farmers just didn't want to have their voices telling their story. For the most part, though, I mean, I've learned something in every conversation that I've had. It's been a lot of fun, and it's certainly the opportunity to talk about agriculture in a very open way. I think farmers have appreciated.
But we've had some good responses from listeners, consumers, who have appreciated what we've always found as the core motivation, is to bring the farming world, the life of a farmer, back into those who consume the food, and make that connection. Because I think it was in the agritourism episode, Lisa from University of Vermont noted that 3 generations ago, everybody was married into a farm somewhere in their family structure, right? An uncle, a cousin, a brother, even if they weren't farming themselves. And Rachel Martin in the episode on the world tour noted that a survey in Ireland, only less than half of Irish kids knew that milk came from a cow. So it, of course, comes from a carton in the supermarket. Where else does it come from? And even if they know a cow gives milk, making the connection between what they're consuming and eating is far removed in an urban context. So there are many challenges like that, and that is the motivation of this podcast in many ways, is to connect the two ends of the agri-food equation together.
I am blessed to see that firsthand every day. And I remember Dad getting so uptight whenever kids would drop gravel in the water buckets for the livestock or in the water bowls. What is up with these kids and gravel? What is wrong with them? They don't see gravel on a daily basis. They don't know what it is. They have AstroTurf and pavement and concrete, and that's all they experience. And wow, a pebble. It is that simple. So from there on up, it's all an educational experience for them.
So, Phil and Sarah, as we head towards the second season in September, what are the topics you'd like to have us delve into?
I would love to talk to the minister in charge of government efficiency. That's what I want. We need to slim things down and get things more efficient.
Well, we're definitely going to delve into the election and get some representation from the different political parties to give some points of view. So we'll put that on the list for sure.
That would be fun.
Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I think one thing that we've sort of shown with this first season is that we can be pretty flexible. So I don't, there's a lot of topics that I can come up with off the top of my head, but I think that, making sure that we stay flexible and that we can sort of look at what starts to happen because if nothing else, they are suggesting that we're looking at a mean El Nino coming up. So that suggests that the end of the season could be a little bit rock and roll. And so I think just maintaining that flexibility and making sure that we're covering the things as they're happening is important. But I also want to make sure that we get a couple more, just some of the stories, I think, behind our farms. I think if you look at, where we are based in the Chateauguay Valley, we've got like these century-old farms all over the place, these fields that have been worked for, hundreds of years. And I think maybe trying to find some of those stories and bring some of that history out a little bit, like we did with our heritage farming episode, could be a lot of fun. Just get a couple more, some of the voices of our farm community and some of the more interesting things they're doing. So we talked about temporary foreign workers. One thing I'm really wanting to do, because the World Cup is on and I'm a big soccer fan, and I know that there are some wicked soccer players in our temporary foreign worker community, and there's a soccer league, believe it or not, that has been created. And we have a church in our area that's done a tremendous amount of work to try to make sure that that community feels like they're at home here with church services at specific times of the year, like I said, and emphasizing soccer and just making sure that they have community and a sense of community. And I've heard the soccer is pretty amazing. So
yeah, it is. This coming Saturday is a big game coming up.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to some of those stories and maybe some of the lighter stories too. We covered a lot of heavy stuff. There's some fun in farming that I think we can get at too. So
yeah, like microbreweries, right? Let's do that one again.
Vineyards,
all right. Well, it's been a great conversation. It's been a great season. Really enjoyed it. Getting back to the radio roots in a different technological sort of way. Have a great summer. And we'll be back in September with another season of sharing stories about farming in the Chateauguay Valley and around the world.
And Jackie, I want to apologize for all of my tardiness through the entire season. I was always late handing in my intro. I'm sorry. Have a good day.
It's nothing that a nice bushel of strawberries. Strawberries come in bushels. I don't know. I could book that easy. No worries.
Phil, you have to understand you're not alone.
Okay, good.
Have a great season.
All right.
Yes,
thanks very much. So now we're joined by our news reporter, Callan Forrester. Welcome, Callan.
Hi, Hugh. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat a little bit for our last episode of the season.
Yes, indeed. And you've been out and about over the course of the season, doing some streeters with consumers and talking to them about their awareness and what they know, what they don't know. About the realities of farming and including how much they care or think that it matters. Give us a quick summary.
Yeah, so I think that the thing that I've learned the most over the past few months of speaking with these people is that people I do think want to care about the food that they're consuming. They are interested. But the biggest factor that's coming up right now is cost and the cost of food. A lot of folks were saying, they want to be focusing on local products or organic products. They want to be visiting farmers markets, but the overwhelming feeling is that food is so expensive right now that they kind of have to focus on whatever is most affordable to them. Which doesn't mean that the interest isn't there. They are interested in knowing about farms and knowing about where their food is coming from. But it's tough right now to balance that desire with what people can actually afford.
I think there was always this concept that fresh food at a market is more expensive than in a grocery store. I think people have that thought. Is that still there? And is that even still the case?
Like to a large extent at a farmer's market, if you go and if you actually shop prices, you'll find that what you're getting is a fresher product that will last longer. So if you factor that into your actual price, if you buy, a large bag of McAuslan, for example, so leafy greens from a grocery store, you might get 3-4 days out of it because it's been picked for transport. Whereas if you buy it from a farmer's market, you've got 2 weeks of lettuce if you can make it last that long. So I think that there is that misconception that's there. But also to a large extent, the market pricing is coming down and grocery store pricing is going up. And what you'll find is more regularity. At a farmer's market, the prices won't change, whereas they will bounce around a lot in a grocery store.
Yeah, I can definitely say that when visiting grocery stores to speak to people or visiting the farmers markets, prices in grocery stores are just truly astronomical right now, especially for produce and stuff. And I think that's more where I was hearing people say things about I just buy whatever is cheapest. And I visited multiple grocery stores, ones that are a little bit more expensive just normally, and one that are for lower income folks. But across the board, the answer was overwhelmingly, I don't buy organic unless it's on sale. Or, I spoke to one man who was like, well, money isn't an issue for me, so I look at whatever looks good. So it was just interesting that money was coming up as just a really big point. Whereas when I was at the farmers market, people were often talking about the community there and how much they love coming to these markets because they get to be in community with other people they live close to, and they get to just experience that firsthand.
That's such a...
Yeah, and the challenge for farmers at farmers markets or selling directly to consumers, however the method they use, is the loss leaders in the supermarket, which I think is what gives the impression that farmers markets are more expensive, because the supermarkets will bring in 10 truckloads of blueberries, right during blueberry season and put them on sale. The supermarket is losing money, but they know that you'll buy milk, eggs, and bread and other stuff that will make up that loss. So then when you can buy blueberries in the supermarket for half the price that you can buy them at the farmer's market, you tend to think the farmer's market's more expensive. But that's not the case at all. And then, of course, the whole quality thing is that when you buy from Sarah at the Huntington market or Farmer Phil at the St. Anne de Bellevue market, that product was picked last night or even in the morning, and so you're getting it absolutely fresh. Whereas if you're buying sweet corn at the supermarket from Florida, it's been in a truck for over a week, and no wonder it tastes starchy.
Yeah. And I will say, when I was at the market speaking with folks, I obviously also had to pick up some treats for myself because when in Rome. And it was interesting. There was a man there selling rhubarb, herbs, and lettuce. That was what his specialties were. And his stand was anything you bought, it was $6 or 2 for $10. And then he also offered a pay what you can option for folks who couldn't necessarily afford fresh veggies that week. And I'm like, you're never getting that at the grocery store. If I'm running into IGA and I'm like, well, my budget's a little tight this week, they're never going to be like, you just take the rhubarb. It's nice to be in community with folks and see that, obviously these people who are coming to farmers markets every week, especially in the city, it's quite a trek, care a lot about what they're providing the community with.
That's such a good point, Callan. It's more than just the food, eh? It's the experience, and it's the connection with the person who grew the food.
Mm-hmm.
You're noticing that really matters to people.
Yeah, I noticed that everyone who I spoke to at the market mentioned community and mentioned getting to experience the day instead of it just feeling like a chore of going to the grocery store.
I think it's probably important to mention that for the farmers too. It's important to be making that travel to get to the farmers market, because that's where we get a little bit, confirmation that what we're doing matters is in those connections as well. So it's a two-way. Definitely.
Anything else, Callan, that you could say you noticed from consumers about their food and about farming in general?
I think, to me, the most interesting point that was brought up in all of the streeters that I did was the idea of balancing organic versus local. And people were torn on that, where some people were saying that she would rather, there's a woman I spoke to who said she would rather buy something local than buying something organic. But then other people were saying, I'd rather buy organic even if it comes from further away. I think it's interesting that there's a difference of opinion on that. Yeah, and I guess that to me points to maybe a bit of a lack of an understanding about farming in a way too, because I think that I personally always think that local is more exciting because it means that it's fresher. Sarah, like you were saying, it means that it could be picked this morning and then in the market this afternoon, whereas something that's organic could be coming from California, and then it's like, well, that has a bigger environmental impact because we have to pay for travel costs. The price goes up, but not everybody knows about that. So I think that was just an interesting debate that sort of came up.
Yeah, we had that come up in the interviews that we did in the one of the episodes we did talked about labeling and things like that too. And so the different ways that our food is labeled. So you have organic, like you were saying, local, then there's also, sustainably grown, all of these different things that don't actually have standards, but that are being used right now, that really just adds to the confusion when it comes to the consumer and what they're looking for, really.
Yeah.
Is something that's, good, that tastes good, and that's within their price point. But, you add on all of these different labels and it starts to become complicated.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Callan. Enjoy the summer season.
Thanks, you too. Thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Farm to Food podcast, presented to you by Desjardins. We will have lots more about farming and all things agri-food in the coming weeks, and we'd like to thank our partners for helping bring this initiative to life. The Livestock Breeders Association in Ormstown and Quinn Farm in Notre-Dame de Île-Perrot for promotional support.
This program is also made possible by the volunteer directors on the board of the Chateauguay Valley Community Information Services, non-profit social enterprise with charitable status. So please support these efforts by making a tax-deductible donation at farmtofood.ca.
The Farm to Food podcast has been made possible by the hard work and creative effort of the following people at the Gleaner: Hugh Maynard, publisher; Jackie Rourke, associate publisher; Sarah Rennie, news editor; Chantal Hortop, managing editor; Erica Taylor, copy editor; Stacey Pennington, audio production; Diana Chicky, sales and marketing; José Menard, office manager; Gail Elliott, administration; and myself, Callan Forrester, reporter.
And, of course, Farmer Phil. He'll be back in 2 weeks as part of our bi-weekly Farm to Food podcast, with lots of interesting stories on the journey of food from the land to the kitchen table. Thanks for listening, and we appreciate your support for local journalism at farmtofood.ca.